Hello and welcome to my presentation today. My name is Fritsch, and today I'm going to tell you about the persuasive narrator used in John Marsden's Tomorrow When the War Began, and how hopefully you as writers can utilize this tool to provide your works with an added layer of emotional depth. So, what is the persuasive narrator? In short, this technique is used to try and convince the reader to align their opinions and thoughts on the events of the plot to that of the narrator who is telling the story. To achieve this from a stylistic level requires modulation of certain words and phrases to give your narrator an aura of authenticity to what they are saying. This is particularly useful when the plot is being delivered in the first-person perspective. This adds characterization to whoever is presenting the sequence of events and widens the scope of conclusions the reader can draw from the text protagonist. The goal here is to give your narrator a sympathetic stance in the context of the plot, and create a personal relationship between them and the reader so that they end up relating to the beliefs and values expressed. It's storytelling with a purpose, and works hard at challenging the reader to side with them when presented with difficult choices or actions. The best way to execute this technique is with subtlety. Emphasize certain keywords or construct your sentences in unusual ways to subconsciously elicit an emotional response from your reader, which will see them build trust with your narrator. John Marsden brilliantly accomplishes this in his novel, and we're going to take a look at how you can emulate these techniques to your advantage. But firstly, some quick information on the novel Tomorrow When the War Began. Published in 1993, the book deals in heavy themes about the effects on war on the mind and spirit. The narrator in this novel is Ellie, a teenager whose life and morals are thrown into jeopardy after her home is invaded and she is forced into hiding and surviving off the land. Marsden needs the reader to trust Ellie throughout the text. She struggles deeply with her place and purpose in this war, and yet has to be decisive in her actions, even if they themselves aren't always right. Written as journal entries by Ellie to keep account of the events taking place, Marsden channels through her the hardships of choosing between what is easy and what is right, all the while making attempts in the writing to persuade the readers to understand where she is coming from. Ellie's persuasive narration in Tomorrow When the War Began is a great example of how to effectively use the narrator to shape the perception of the plot for the reader to corroborate with theirs. The first technique you can use to create the persuasive narrator is called subconscious framing. This idea was created by Busy Ulrich, who in his own words says that subconscious framing is the act of shaping a favorable perception that is in line with your intent, while portraying confidence where most writers mistakenly tend to communicate uncertainty. Essentially, if you want your narrator to have authority in the things they say, then you need to make them sound confident. This will in turn build trust between the narrator and author, and provide a level of superiority to what they have to say. Use this technique in moments of important decision making or when the narrator is having to present an argument. Eliminate signs of weakness from their voice and craft your language to sound powerful yet not assertive. An example of this in the text is, I hope Chris doesn't mind my being chosen to do this instead of him, because he is a really good writer. He did look a bit hurt, a bit jealous even, but he hasn't been in this from the start, so it wouldn't have worked. Now let's take this quote apart, piece by piece, and see exactly how Marsden is making us believe in Ellie's stance simply by how confident she presents her arguments through the language. I hope Chris doesn't mind my being chosen to do this instead of him, because he is a really good writer. Here we see Ellie setting up the relationship between her and Chris by displaying her respect and admiration for his abilities. By doing so, we as readers understand Ellie's approach as someone who isn't without restraint in her analysis of the people and situations around her, and as such encourages the reader to take her on her word. The word really here helps stress the extent of the narrator's evaluation, and produces an assured tone which helps the reader have faith in the situation. Next up, he did look a bit hurt, a bit jealous even, is more about showing the confidence of the narrator in portraying the characters through their own prejudices. The description here is fairly negative about the reaction, but there's still an empathetic quality to the way it's delivered. This will continue to strengthen that bond between reader and narrator, in the sense that the reader will now respect the honesty portrayed in how powerful and forthright the voice is here. But he hasn't been in this from the start, so it wouldn't have worked. This makes the reader appreciate the stance of the narrator, and subconsciously concludes that their arguments hold more validity and purpose than those of others. Strong, convincing words such as hasn't or wouldn't leave little doubt about the validity of the narrator's claims. The reader is now fully trusting of the perspective presented to them, as it is so full of confidence and self-assurance that they are directly influenced to acknowledge and accept what is being presented. Marsden here is setting up the trust between the narrator and the reader from the very beginning of the novel, and we can trust that whatever is being said has confidence and has assurance and has arguments backing it up from here on in. The next technique I want to talk about is word emphasis. This is trying to draw attention to certain key words in an attempt to deliberately provide a certain emotional response from them. You can do this by capitalizing the words, by trying to make them sound important, by placing them at important sections in the sentence to draw attention to them. But likewise, you also want to pull away from other words in order to create contrast. Hopefully, this is going to help the reader then understand the binaries of the situation more and help them align with your narrator more. This is going to provoke your readers to interpret the significance of the situation through the way the narrator has chosen to deliver the language. So let's take a look at an example from the text. Humans would call it evil, the big dragonfly destroying the mosquito and ignoring the little insect suffering. Yet humans hated mosquitoes too, calling them vicious and bloodthirsty. All these words like evil and vicious, they mean nothing to nature. Yes, evil was a human invention. Dissecting this quote, we can see that the metaphor of the insects is fairly obvious, with the dragonfly being shown as the enemy, the mosquito being shown as the victim, but it's the way that it's structured which gives it more meaning. Importantly, nature is capitalized here, which positions the reader's perception of it to be more important, something that needs to be respected and valued. In pagan religions, nature is actually seen as a sacred entity, and you can see Marsden try to channel that through this passage here. Likewise, however, humans is always in a lowercase, which puts it below nature in the pecking order of the way in which the narrator values each of them. This is showing more apathy and low respect towards human beings as opposed to nature. The narrator is telling the reader what to value and what not to through the punctuation here. Readers therefore view nature as being more pure and righteous than humans, therefore align their opinions with that of the narrator. The final technique I want to talk about while trying to create the persuasive narrator is that of asyndeton. This is constructing your sentences without the use of any conjunction words such as and. This is going to give the flow of your sentences a very harsh feel to them, but at the same time creates a more personal and intimate bond between the language and the reader. This is best used in dire situations throughout the plot, as naturally your narrator will have trouble trying to reflect their feelings and thoughts through the language. The short staccato type quality and essence to these sentences therefore is a good way for the reader to sympathize more with your narrator in kind of their struggling of comprehension of events. An example of this from the text is, I was so worried about her and Lee, had been missing them so much, was so scared at the prospect of any more confrontations with the soul. Looking at this quote, we can see that there are no conjunction words whatsoever connecting it. However, there is a high repetition of the word so. This is to heighten the intensity of the events taking place here. The readers are encouraged to sympathize with the narrator's point of view as the fragmented sentences viscerally reflect their emotions. The sentence jumps between reflections of the past and anxiety about the future, which then climaxes with the potential threat of future confrontations. Readers are swept along with the immediacy of the passage and therefore view the plot through the same lenses of the narrator. Now I'm going to take a look at some of my examples of the persuasive narrator in my writings, and hopefully how you might be able to use some of these techniques in your own. First up, we have, there was no doubt that I needed to talk to the professor about my grades. We had spoken at length about the project, and everything I put forward was green-lighted. So I feel betrayed about the outcome here. I'll shoot him through an email right now. I know I can get him to have a second look. And secondly, things were desperate, things were ugly. She did not want to talk, did not want to listen to my pleadings. She was distant, about what I don't know. But something had changed her. I just missed the old days. The first quote of mine focuses on those first two techniques we talked about, subconscious framing and word emphasis. Now look at quotes such as "no doubt" and "I know." These are phrases which portray a lot of confidence from the narrator. This uses subconscious framing to convince the reader of the narrator's position. This leaves the reader little choice about what side they fall on in this dispute, as the confident tone leads them to believe in the authenticity of the narrator. However, at the same time, it's also antagonizing the opposition, as it kind of makes them sound more weak and less believable, less credible. In terms of emphasizing certain words, you have powerful emotional words like green-lighted, betrayed, shoot. This is trying to emphasize the point which the narrator is attempting to get across. This quote portrays a lot of confidence and projects a lot of credibility in the points in which the narrator is trying to make, and therefore builds trust between the narrator and the reader. The second of my quotes focuses more on sentence structure, in particular that asyndeton sentence structure we were talking about earlier. This is a more sympathetic approach to persuading the reader. The lack of conjunction words here throughout the passage doesn't give the reader time to breathe, therefore allows them to relate to the mindset of the narrator to a greater extent. This is going to make the narrator sound more vulnerable. Things were desperate, things were ugly sounds more harsh and sharp than saying things were desperate and things were ugly. It creates that personal connection we've been talking about. The harsher tone of the passage provokes an authentic sense of empathy within the reader towards the reflections of the narrator. So, in conclusion, the persuasive narrator is an effective tool you can use in your writing in order to make your storytelling sound more relatable, credible, believable in any kind of sense. It's important to note that you can make it sound authoritative or sympathetic, or even both at the same time. The idea here is to challenge the reader's perception of the plot or themes of the novel through the arguments made by the narrator. Use it to bring emotional depth to the language of your writing. And you do this by making your narrator sound confident, playing around with emphasizing words or phrases, and constructing your sentences wisely in a manner which will affect your reader to relate with their point of view. Thank you for listening.